Welcome everybody. This is a Beam Exchange Grab the Mic webinar. The Beam Exchange is a platform for sharing information and knowledge about market systems development. And I'm Mike Albu, and I'm lucky enough to be responsible for managing the Beam Exchange with my colleague Isabel. Today, we're going to be having a webinar from colleagues, mainly speaking from Ethiopia, talking about how to change public policy using an MSD approach. And this is from the program called LIWAY, which is very exciting because I think this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in, the application of market systems development particularly to influencing public policy and public sector actors. So today we're going to have 4 speakers. We have Alemtsehai, who's the chief of party for the LIWAY program. We have Yewubdah, who leads their work on small and micro enterprise. Meseret, who is the former lead for their work on labour markets, and Ben Taylor, who is the CEO of Agora Global, who's been an advisor to the LIWAY program. Now, before I hand over to these excellent 4 speakers, I just want to remind you a little bit about how Zoom works in case you're new to this platform, because we will, first of all, there's a chat facility and you're very welcome to introduce yourselves. Please do. It's always useful to know who else is in the room. In the chat box, you'll see that down the bottom of the screen. But you'll also see a box labeled Q&A, and that's where we would like you to put questions for the speakers. So I think the speakers are going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for answering your questions. So please don't put the questions in the chat, put them in the Q&A box. Other than that, I think we're ready to go. I'll come back after the presentation with some more thoughts. But for now, let me hand over to these guys who are going to talk about LIWAY's work in Ethiopia.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm glad to be in this session today. And I'm going to present 2 slides, basically providing background about the LIWAY program. So this first slide, it's LIWAY, it's a livelihood improvement for women and youth program. It's an MSD program with the aim of creating jobs for women and youth in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And just to provide a brief context under which the LIWAY program is operating, there is an ever-increasing unemployment rate in Ethiopia, specifically more recently. And this unemployment rate is increasing particularly for young people in urban areas. So the number of unemployed youth, both men and women, is increasing. The number of unemployed women takes a much higher proportion. And studies also show that in the past 5 years, urban youth unemployment has increased from 23% to 26%. And even if there is, it's reported that Ethiopia's economy has grown in the same period, it didn't create as much new jobs that could absorb this labor force joining the market every year. And the other context is there is an extreme urban poverty, particularly in Addis Ababa, whereby there is lack of adequate support system for the vulnerable people to resist shocks, more specifically economic shocks. And there is also migration of youth. Youth migrate from rural to urban parts of the country for various reasons. The economic reason being the most push factor, and they're also mainly looking for jobs, and also on the other side there is also shortage of land in rural areas. So this all is exacerbating the need to migrate from rural to urban areas. There is also heavy reliance of the poor on the informal economy. which this informal economy is presenting very limited opportunity for growth and livelihoods improvement of these poor people. Also, there was internal conflict in the country. There are many economic challenges. Also, COVID posed critical challenge. It negatively impacted the LIWAY program because of no travel restrictions. And also there are like interventions specifically affected by COVID, such as our childcare intervention and so on. So this COVID internal conflict has impacted LIWAY a lot. Next, please. And this slide is showing the 4 focus areas of the LIWAY program. And as you see, LIWAY works on these 3, the green, yellow, red, these 3 productive systems that are the labor system, the micro and small enterprise system, the medium and large enterprise system, that are all supported by the skills system or the skills development. And these systems are basically representing the whole economy that poor people are engaged in and also earn a living from. And when we look specifically at the labor system, these people, young people, are working in the informal work, more specifically on short-term jobs. To name few, like domestic work, they also engage in construction work, the gig economy, and so on. And in the micro and small enterprise system, young people start and grow micro and small enterprises of various natures. They focus on different activities, usually with low skill sets, and they also change from one line to the other very often. In the MLD system, they work in medium and large urban industries. These industries are not related to the industrial parks where most donors are interested to invest on and so on. LIWAY is focusing more on those type of, apart from the industrial parks, we're focusing on the medium and large enterprises, specifically working on tissue paper, for example, cement, household products, and so on. And LIWAY's overall objective is to ensure to address the constraints that prevent poor urban women and youth from gaining economic opportunities through engaging in these 3 different systems. So this is what I have, and the next slide will be presented by Ben. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Alan. So you can see here the kind of unusual and interconnected way that LIWAY works, doing the things that others won't in addressing these messy kind of urban systems, portfolio careers, that kind of thing. And I think similarly, just providing some context on Ethiopia, you've got an economy in which the state is still heavily involved. It's a post-communist economy. And you'll barely find an economic sector in which there is not a parastatal or heavy regulation, or it's been liberalizing over 30 years or so, but it's still a very state-influenced economy, if not state-controlled. And I think just as a lot of MSD programs kind of like to do the clean linear value chain stuff that is very easily defined, similarly, I think often MSD programs don't work with government and seek to work around it instead, because it can be quite difficult to do, and the types of interventions you might come up with are a bit more kind of difficult. But in the Ethiopian context, if you don't work with or through or get the consent of government, then you're not going to get anywhere, because they are everywhere. And if you're looking at scale of change, particularly in these messy sectors, where we're working one day to try and benefit people who are selling spices, and the same person the next day is selling phone cards, and the next day they're getting some things off the back of a truck, and we're trying to benefit them all with all of these various ways that they survive, they make their living. So what have we done? I won't go into it in detail because there are 7 case studies, if I can do a quick plug. 4 of them are intervention level case studies, and 3 of them are thematic case studies, of which the policy paper is 1. But across policy, we've done things like working on a national ID card system, because everyone gets an ID card from the place they are born, and when they move between the federal regions, they're not allowed to work in the place they get to. We've done things on the provision of space for micro enterprises in these state-supported bazaars to sell in. We've done things on how federal TVET agencies integrate industrial placements in their curriculum. So a whole range of stuff. And this is just to indicate that there's policy dimensions to everything we do. Sometimes it's specific, sometimes it's more generalized. And we haven't got any magic wands in doing that. We've done research and advocacy, direct piloting, soft influencing, and technical assistance, the usual MSD toolkit. And we've deployed those, as you'll see, in kind of different amounts in different cases. But we'll now look at 2 specific intervention case studies, and then I'll wrap up with some cross-cutting lessons at the end. Meseret.
Thank you, Bender. So I will be talking about one of the interventions that we have done for the labor system. So basically, when we refer to the labor market from a system lens, this is the exchange in terms of supplying, labor and employers demanding labor. And understanding the underperformance, what actually is a critical constraint, is where we begin. So what we have actually seen is from job seekers, poor women and youth actually have to travel long distance to make sure that they have information when it comes to job opportunities and the type of jobs that they're seeking. That adds transaction costs, including transportation, besides actually getting the job. But also paradoxically, from the supplier side, who are like employers, we have witnessed that employers are actually and productivity level. So that is kind of system as part of the other systems is also government has a huge hand on. We have seen that government have set up a system to do registrations of job seekers from the Qabali level, which is the smallest administrative unit. And what job seekers were doing was they go there to give out their names. But what was lacking is there was no way that employers actually
Oh dear, I'm afraid we are having a few problems with the sound from Meseret. Is anyone else able to step in and cover her material while we try and reconnect with her?
Yes, I can do.
Thank
We've
you.
practiced
Sorry
this a
about
couple of times. No worries. I'll do my best. So yes, the government have a mandate to support youth. So we're not trying to change their objectives or anything in that sense. But at the moment, basically, a young person walks into an office and their name gets written on a piece of paper and it gets put into a drawer. Or that was the previous situation. So we did some market analysis to identify the issues, identify that there was a demand side challenge and there's someone who might have an incentive to do something about this. We tried to engage various levels of government. It's a federal system, so you've got national government, federal, region level government, and city government as well. So we tried to engage them in different solutions, tried to narrow down who within that was ready to take a chance and do something differently. And then where we found that was at the Qabali level, so the smallest administrative unit, we found a couple who were willing to take a bit of a risk and try something with us. So we found a job tech company to kind of step in the middle. And in the first initial phase, it was a very direct thing of saying, well, let's at the very least get these records out of drawers and onto computers. And we sought to digitize the records they have so that that information was available and we could start to use it. And throughout, with that mind on scale, we kept the federal and city government kind of updated, because those two cabellas succeeding would be very limited in its impact if it never actually escalated beyond that. Meseret, do you want to have a go again?
Sure, let me try with, okay, next slide. So basically, this slide can show you, even if like there were complex steps that we've taken, engagement that we've taken for this intervention, it kind of shows you where we land at the, the end result, which is an Ethiopian labor market information system that is owned by the government and run by the government. So where we started was with, with the diagnostic process, because there was buy-in only from not the federal level, but the city administrative level. We started that to build in evidence to show what potential, type of system can be, in place, which LIWAY actually paid for that service as well, so that it could be a proof of concept. So for that engagement, we worked with these two subcities. We worked with a bureau that is responsible to manage this work. But honestly, that would not be labeled as a very successful partnership, because of many kind of implementation challenges. We wouldn't call it that, but it kind of built in the ability for us to say there is a potential for this kind of interventions, where we pitched in the scale-up option by either engaging different subcities, other subcities, so bringing them together to talk about what worked and what didn't work. Not only that, but we also solicited interest from a private sector that have been involved in this digitizing of that information system. Luckily for us, there was a shift in the ecosystem, the government ecosystem, where a new authority, which is called Job Creation Commission, was established. So that entity works in a different ways than many of the government entities. So we've actually pitched our idea to them, and they were really interested to try it, but in a different setting. During that time, there has been a huge interest for the Ethiopian government to send, there has been that practice, but to kind of formalize how we locate or job match overseas employment in the Middle East. So that kind of led into the birth of the overseas digital job matching, where we onboarded both JCC and the private sector to try and test. During that time, there were many models that have been tested by other programs, but the LIWAY model has been kind of picked and adapted because we had, plenty of proof of concepts that we were able to stack up until that time, and that led to now this government LMI system, which is government owned and government managed overseas employment matching services. So we used different tools, as you can see, different tools from the tool sets in market system to be able to achieve the change that we want. Next slide, please. In doing this work, we do believe that there were some key success factors and also limiting factors. So understanding the ecosystem that we work in and backing that with analysis is really, really important. That is also in relation to how the federal national government actually work and how they intersect. So really being able to base that information to be able to have engagement with different key stakeholders. In some instances, it felt like nothing was moving. There were situations where we had to wait while government priority was changing. But in all those things, it's really important for the program to keep in mind to be connected to the ecosystem and try the different toolboxes that we have. We were lucky in some instances. The timing that Job Creation Commission was established and the relationship that the lead for this program, which is SNV, has managed to maintain with JCC, as well as the people and the stakeholders there, really helped us to find an entry point. So those kind of opportunities might avail themselves. So it's important for programs to use those. Deploying the right resources is actually in relation to, sometimes it's the piloting, the actual small implementation that is important, but the other time it's not actually investing money, but maintaining relationships, making sure that you're talking to the ecosystem actors. That is really important to do so. But as any program, we did have also limiting factors. During the time of the intervention, we had witnessed COVID, which actually limits the ability of any matching services because of travel restrictions, and Middle East was not actually accepting anyone from our country. There were like the northern crisis that happened, a conflict that happened that has some diplomatic issues around the globe that affected specifically these interventions. So sometimes with big risks come with big rewards. But recognizing that in some contexts, you may not be able to change what is happening. So always begin with your sphere of influence and try to go from there. So that has been our learning. Over to you, Ben.
Well, do we have Yewubdah or not? No? All right, I'll step into the breach again. So the second case that we'll talk about is from the micro and small enterprise system. And for the most part, this system is about the different activities that people do in their own account. They're not being employed by someone else, they're selling goods or services. And for most people, microenterprise is a necessity, not a choice. If there was a formal job offer on the table, they'd take it probably, but they're doing what they can around the conditions that they have, the budgets that they have, the childcare responsibilities and everything else. But for those that can sort of step up and step out of that sort of low investment, low return scenario, then there's very limited potential for them to access new markets, even if they have a great product. And so there are a whole range of constraints that microenterprises face, like the access to operational space, which, as you might not be surprised to hear, has some government control over it. People are allocated a space or not, you can't just buy one. The physical and digital marketplaces that are appropriate for that size of business don't really exist. There's limited information on who wants what and when you're low skilled from low income community, getting the ideas, business skills as well. So you might know exactly how to produce the product, but you might not know how to manage your cash flow, for example, and the access to capital when they are required to invest. There are public policy dimensions to all of these. So here's a list of specific regulations. I won't talk about all of them, but for example, to start any business in a shop, you need, in Ethiopia, I was saying yesterday to the people, like, if you want to be a hairdresser in the UK, you cut someone's hair, and if you do a bad job, they don't come back, and they tell all their friends that they did a bad job. In Ethiopia, you need a certificate of competence to do anything. And if you want to do multiple things, you need multiple certificates of competence, each one of which has a regulatory process and a cost attached to it. And for the e-commerce businesses, if you want to sell many things, you need a license for each of them. So all these are kind of regulatory constraints that prevent this kind of sector from taking off. So e-commerce opens up these potential new markets and reduces costs for all involved, particularly when you don't have physical premises. For example, rents in Addis Ababa are sky high. You know, they've increased above inflation by tenfold. And so if you want to get in a place where people, you know, you've got footfall, for example, it's going to cost you more than you could ever afford as a micro enterprise. But while e-commerce is an opportunity, it faces many specific hurdles as well as the general hurdles that are facing micro enterprises. And these hurdles are actually more acute for the micro enterprises who want to participate in this sector. So there are policy dimensions across all of these different things. So you didn't have a policy team or a policy intervention. Any intervention that we wanted to do, we had to look at those formal rules that underpinned it. And what we were able to do, I think, is to find in this emerging area, in this new area, often that's where the rules are greyest. And we found a partner, a private sector partner, who was willing to lose some money in the grey space, if you like. They were willing to invest, knowing that if the government looked a bit too closely, then they might say, hang on, we didn't mean that, that's not allowed, and that money's wasted. So in that climate of uncertainty, they were willing to balance those risks and rewards. And that allowed us to kind of figure out, okay, if policy is clarified, if it's formalized, we know what the best case scenario is now, because we started doing it in this grey space and gone from there. So in trying to scale it beyond that best case, we opted to sort of test and monitor it. So we're constantly trying new things because none of it's kind of been done before. Ethiopia's digital economy is a good 5 to 10 years behind many of its neighbors, partially because the government controls the telecom system. You know, the internet that's not currently working for some of our presenters is government internet. So I think these allow us to learn lessons from there and also to be kind of at the forefront of the innovation. So what we wanted to do was really to show, as the government who were interested in the development of e-commerce, as they were developing this, we were trying to show that within that, micro enterprises have a really important role to play. So don't leave them out. And we were trying to show how that could look.
I think Yewubdah might be available now. If that's helpful, she's got a connection.
Do you want to come in, Yewubdah? No, you're on mute if you are trying to come in.
Yeah, you're muted, Yewubdah.
All right, let me press on.
Can I speak now?
Oh, she's back. Do you want to take over? We're a little bit short on time. Technical difficulties.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so there were two different approaches that we broadly used. One is where we were kind of at the forefront, and we were kind of an independent, credible facilitator because there's still a lot of kind of mistrust, distrust between the public and private sector in some sectors in Ethiopia. And so we were kind of the credible, independent facilitator. An example of that being where we were able to shape the pitch of how the private companies could approach the revenue authority and say, you have to showcase this not as we're trying to pay less tax, but we're trying to make the system more efficient, maybe so you get more tax. So we're trying to play a balanced perspective, understanding the incentives on both sides. And in those cases, we were engaging directly with government. And then in other cases, the more background approach, we took a step back because these are not our fields to play in, although we were very interested in the outcome and therefore had to try and shape it. So with Belkash, who was the technology partner in that pilot, we were able to use our good relationship with them to say, I know you're going into these consultations on X, Y, and Z issue, but we also think it's really important to include A, B, and C. And so they could be our conduit, if you like, to try to influence broader policies beyond their own interests. So we have continued those foreground and background advocacy efforts across the digital economy for microenterprises in a whole range of areas, and it's led to quite some changes. You can see them in the case study paper. But yeah, in the interest of time, let me move on to the final slide for this. So success factors there is that we found this risk-taking partner who was willing to lose money, essentially. Yeah, in this infant industry, we needed a showcase. We needed something to latch onto, some evidence. And so we had to operate in this silo, if you like, outside of government. And but engaging the government in the pilots helped them to recognize the barriers that they were presenting to what we were trying to do. And you know, aligned with what they wanted to happen, but you know, they had no experience of having done this before. And Belkash, it's worth pointing out, has Dutch investment, it has experience elsewhere. They kind of know how this works, but they don't know how it works in an emerging Ethiopian regulatory environment. And we were able to use those foreground and background approaches I mentioned, which was a positive thing to get the change that we wanted to see. And then the difficult factors in Ethiopia, there's this huge government apparatus, many different people had a role to play. And you know, at some point we were like confused as to why the Food and Drug Administration had a role to play in the digital economy or something, but you know, there's always someone else who was there and everyone doesn't exactly know what their remit is. So it was really difficult to coordinate some of these policy changes where there was no clear plan as to whose responsibility something was. Within that common theme, counterparts were continually changing. So, you know, as I'll come back to this, but as Meseret mentioned, the Job Creation Commission was a really positive force for change, went over the top of the Ministry of Labour and Skills at one point, and then all of a sudden was collapsed and went under the Ministry of Industry. So the power balance kept shifting and it was hard for us to kind of latch on to anyone in particular. And I think this last one's probably the most important, is that once you get that interest, if this is a new area, it's not something where we have known the answer for years. We don't know what better looks like in this context. And the government might, you know, you might have to do some convincing to get them interested, but once they're interested, they want to know the answer before the answer is ready. And so you have to make some educated guesses because you might not get that seat at the table again. So we were doing quite a bit of that along the way. Okay, this is the final slide, and then we'll have some questions. So key success factors across the piece were that where necessary, we had to work outside government and build the evidence base and momentum. So we were almost simulating what a good policy might look like and then getting the results to influence the actual policy change later on. Second is more tactically to say that we were trying to follow the momentum and the success of any particular company. You know, in the case of the labour markets, we didn't go into it in detail, but our partner basically fell apart for an internal reason. But the success of that partner is not the success of the intervention, which remains a valid idea. And similarly, you know, the JCC, while it might have been the hero at some point, very soon became the villain. And our job is not to strengthen any particular organization, institution, whatever. It's to try and use them as a means to an end, essentially. And that, trying to balance that with the third factor, is to develop these strong relationships. So at some point, you have to kind of pretend that they are the most important person in your life. and develop strong relationships with them. That involves real actor level analysis. You know, who is our counterpart? Where are they in their career? What is their ambition? You know, what KPIs do they have to show to their boss? And we're talking about JCC, for example. It wasn't JCC. It was one person whose job was to develop this new policy, and he used to be a consultant, and we could speak consultancy language to them. So it's really micro level analysis if you want that change to happen. And then the last piece is just, as Meseret said, deploying the right tactics at the right time. We hosted events where events were necessary. We gave cash grants. You know, we did the really direct thing of digitizing those job seeker records at one point, just because without it, no one else is going to pay for it, and we need it to get a foothold. And then the last little bit is just, if you look at the policy cycle, obviously, to get the policy idea, to know what needs to change, you need some evidence to generate the idea. Then you have the formal policy change, and then you have the operationalization of that change. And we sometimes had to engage at each of those stages within that cycle. So where there is no policy and we want to generate evidence, we do that and almost simulate this evidence outside of government. Where we want to change the policy directly and we actually feel that there is a need for a formal new policy, we could do more of the things like research and advocacy and engaging directly with government to change the formal rules. And then in the last level, it was more like where these formal rules exist, but they're not made practical. And we get down to much more local levels of government and help them to realize the mandate that they have, essentially. Sorry, that was more of me than intended.
Thank you, Ben. Let's hope we can hear from the others a bit more in the Q&A now that we've overcome the technical, hopefully overcome the technical hitches. Yeah, very interesting. There's been a few questions in relation to these two case studies. Let's start with the first case study, which is the one about the labour market systems. So Gun and Dave Boselli, Gun and Ericsson and Dave Boselli both asked a similar kind of question, really, which is, how did you create a shared vision with the local government people about what you were trying to do? What motivated and incentivized those agencies to take action or to change? Maybe Meseret, you can help us with that one.
Sure. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Yes. Okay. So with this specific context, actually government is mandated, especially the local government is given a mandate. It's not something that we created. They are required by law to do the registration of job seekers at a Qabali level. That has not been something that we initiated. That has been there already. But what we kind of leveraged on was, how can we make that system better? How can we make sure that, because initially the system was set up, one, for job seekers who want to do, wage employment, but also the system was more focused on people who want to do self-employment. So, people were coming to register, not only register, come together as a group, and somehow even channel funds through this group formation for them to be able to start small businesses. So those are like the systems that were already existent. So what we did was actually not created a new one, but trying to actually create, how can we make this efficient in a way? One, because what was lacking in that system is government was doing the registration of job seekers, but there is no way to connect to employers, which doesn't actually means like the job matching is not happening. But to actually see the implementation side of it, even if we digitalized the system, even if there was like a private sector that we talked to, local governments, and we also try to pick those that are more interested in, more open. We try to kind of create sense of competition between the subcities as well. Like, you know, this subcity is doing this, why not you pick this work? This seems to be kind of interesting. So it's basically playing around on the incentive that was already existent, rather than trying to create that. With the private sector, actually, they used it as a way to do like entry to this market. They were not you know, job matching service providers before, but they used to do certain technological development, and they wanted to kind of tap in to the opportunity that, you know, this new space is kind of offering. So that was more like a learning incentive in being able to be the pioneer in that area for the private sector.
Thank you, Meseret. Let's have a look at some of the other questions that are coming in. So Dave Besselli also asked, he said that it's interesting to see that the objectives, the sub-objectives were both gaining access to jobs as well as starting businesses. Is the pathway to starting a business not an entirely separate system? Does it require a whole different set of dynamics, different kind of analysis?
I don't want to jump in, but I can.
Yeah, go on, Ben.
I think if you consider the type of businesses that we're thinking about, then they're not. I mean, on both sides, if you considered formal, like work in factories, for example, work in the textile factories, which is what a lot of donors have focused on in Ethiopia, then you have a really specific set of technical skills. And if you consider starting a micro enterprise that is focused on, you know, production of niche handbags or whatever, that's a really specific set of technical skills, and you need very formal administrative systems. On both sides, we're talking about domestic workers, construction laborers on the labor side, and on the micro enterprise side, we're talking about people who are hustling. You know, they're selling things on street corners. Sometimes they're manufacturing, but they'll be making bread at home and doing those kind of things. And so there are some basic common skills, but in that skills development system, which we didn't really talk about in depth, but there's a whole, you know, there's 30, 40 interventions in that system. We're looking at the way that the skills development system finds out what skills the market needs, for example, rather than training on any specific skills, how they market their skills development programs to potential trainees through tracking of students that graduate and all those kind of things. So yeah, so hope that partially answered the question.
Thank you, Ben. I'm wondering if Yewubdah, because you missed out on the we lost you during a crucial part of the presentation, whether you had anything you wanted to add to what Ben was saying about the small and micro enterprise work.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry for inconvenience it was created anyway. You know, micro enterprises, you know, usually unemployed or underemployed people are really trying to survive, but there are other growth-oriented enterprise who are able to sell and grow, but they have the limited market opportunity. So what we are trying to introduce is, you know, e-commerce, which is really an alternative way of solving, you know, the marketing and the promotion aspect, so that the micro enterprise who have limited, you know, resources, who have limited capital, can focus on production or on the basic, you know, production aspect. So the service provider like Hailu Market or Bail Cash focusing on promotion, branding, you know, selling and, you know, providing all across the value chain in terms of delivery. So it has also added, you know, the warehouse system for those micro enterprises who are very limited, you know, working space, even they can deliver the product to the cash or Hailu market, so that they focus on their production. So they don't need to worry about the promotion, market information, those, additional aspects which are beyond the skills and the capacity of micro enterprise can be, systematically addressed by, service provider. What are interesting is the government has interest on this digitizing, but they didn't know the answer. So the pilot provided, incentive because they were so much interested. We tried to engage them from grassroots to the bureau level, so they were realize, the operational challenge despite the potential to resolve, the market constraints in terms of increasing the sale and also increasing income opportunity within this digitization effort. So because of this close engagement of the government, they were able to see, the challenge. So they were trigger interest to also address the public, regulatory constraints. So that is the incentive for us to, to really influence, because they were able to really to see closely because of the close engagement, because of our facilitation of, both, like Ben said, as a forefront as needed as a key facilitator. But whenever there is, no place in the table, we package, the implementing partner becoming as a key actor, because it is not from the secondary information, they have the first information, how it works, how to deliver, how is the challenge, both from demand and supply side. So that is the beauty of, intervention-based, evidence-based, contribution to the public policy initiative.
Sure. So this is maybe a related question from Ellen Carlson at CEDA. She's asking really, were these policy constraints identified in advance through your analysis, or did they emerge more organically through the trial and error of the actual intervention process?
Yeah, initially in every aspect, whether in the operational aspect, in the finance, as well as in the information, market system and demand and supply analysis, rules and regulation is simultaneously identified in every intervention area. In this e-commerce, physical, space or retail space is unaffordable. It is beyond the capacity of micro enterprise, because getting appropriate space or getting affordable space is beyond the reach of, most of the micro enterprise. So this really optimizes the cost and facilitates the entry and the growth of enterprise. What the constraint, the constraint was identified at initial stage. The digitalization process was not our initial initiative. Our initial intervention is to address the physical, solution, like improving the public-private, bazaar, so that the government are familiar with and clearly, easily collaborate with private actors. But since the structure and the intention of the government on e-commerce was there, the structure was there, but the answer was not there, like Ben said at the end. So we were, we were on the boat, both the public and the private actor, because of the presence of, the committed, innovative, market system cannot be really facilitated unless you get, a committed, having a strong incentive private actor. So since we got the innovative and risk-taking, partner, we were really simultaneously trying to address by showcasing the innovative, this pilot.
Okay, yeah, so very much kind of an emerging agenda. So that raises a question, Ben. How do you capture that kind of influential work on policy change in an MEL system, especially if if the policy objectives are not present at the beginning, they're emerging as the course of the program goes on. So it must be a challenge for your measurement system, or your MEL system.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're lucky to have some very good donors, many of whom are on the call, in that they're kind of realistic about these things, about attribution and whatever else. There's a really technical answer if you read the specific case, not the policy paper, but there's a specific case on the job matching intervention, because our contribution claim there was going to be quite large. We invested quite a lot in trying to demonstrate it. And I think the best kind of technical advice there is to establish all of the possible counterfactuals and investigate them equally as rigorously as you investigate your own potential contribution. Triangulate your data. So in that case, there were lots of possible explanations for why eventually we have ended up with a Ethiopian labour management system that has 300,000 jobs created as a result. It is pretty clear from the case that it wouldn't have happened without us, but there were many other contributory factors. We've got letters of testimony from government that said you were critical to this, and those are from people who no longer work in government, so don't have an incentive to say that because they're not after more money. We've got all the potential other actors who went, yeah, okay, we did something, you did something else. So it's have a really transparent methodology and create counterfactuals that you investigate equally as rigorously as you do your own contribution. That would be the two pieces of advice.
That sounds, yeah, that's very interesting. And so those details, because there's a question from Eliza Mandeli about the details, but they're described in the case studies material which I think Isabel has put a link into the chat. So if you haven't already seen these case studies, again, just to flag up that you can read them on the Beam Exchange. There's a link in the chat to get them. But yeah, it's really only by going into that kind of detail that you can understand exactly how the project stimulated a policy change through its intervention work. And I think that's where the most useful lessons come. Okay, we've still got a few minutes. I'm just having a quick look through if there's any more questions that we haven't really addressed, or if anyone's got anyone in the audience would like to put another question in, where we've still got time to cover a couple of things. I haven't heard. I'm just going to ask Alemtsehai, since you haven't had a chance to say much since the beginning. Are there any other reflections, things you might want to bring into this conversation that you didn't have a chance to at the beginning? That was for you, Alemtsehai.
Yeah, just to mention that I forgot to mention that this program is being funded by the Sweden Embassy in Ethiopia and also the Netherlands Embassy. Yeah, so thank you. Just wanted to add that.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm sure they'll appreciate getting acknowledged in that way.
Mike, maybe there was a question in the chat box. Maybe I can,
yes,
which is actually related to how what motivates public agencies to take action, or what sort of things that we should be in the lookout. So based on this intervention, in some cases it could be like the incentive is from a bigger political agenda. Sometimes it could be, for example, for the overseas employment job matching services. It is something that the government has been, really in a microscope way, because there were a lot of migrants, migrating from Ethiopia to the Middle East without even having a form of traceability, where they're getting employed and where they're getting the service. So those kind of issues were taken as a national level issue, where government was really eager to change how the practice was, and negotiations were happening at that level. But what we were able to do in the local level, national level, feed in on how, or give them the model for what what sort of system that they can set up in to ensure that there is a job matching services, even if it is overseas. So some policy change drives can come from such big big national agendas, but others could be because many of the public authority people, they're also people, right? What motivates them is like as individuals, maybe to be able to do a good work, to be noticed, to get the next promotion. So it's really important for us to be able to kind of in sync and really see what certain dynamics are. Some individuals will be very open to our pitched ideas because they want to be pioneer in what they do, and even if they're working in public institution, they're also individuals. So we look into individual incentives, even if it is like a public organization as well.
Thank you very much, Meseret. That's a really good point to remember, isn't it? It's all about relationships as much as anything. Thank you very much, all four of you, and I'm sorry for the technical hiccups. Before we close, and we're going to finish in a minute, I would just like everybody to fill in a very quick feedback form. There's a link in the chat. Let us know what you found useful or less useful about the webinar. We can help improve it. There was a nice last sort of comment from Dave Boselli, one of the audience. He said in response to Ben's point about investigating counterfactuals, that's a really great message, I think, for all programs to do more to investigate the ways in which things might have happened without your help, and just to be really sure that what you're doing is really the cause of the changes that you can see. It's a good message for us all. But otherwise, yeah, just a really big thank you to all four of you for this. It's been great. Yewubdah, I'm sorry we lost you at a crucial point. Meseret, for your very clear explanations, and Alemtsehai for remembering to thank the donors, and Ben for stepping in, and holding it all together when we lost the connection. It's been great talking to you all, and thank you very much.